Sometimes the people who recognize us first are the ones we've never met before. The ballroom of the Grand Mercer Hotel shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than most people's homes. But Daniel Black barely noticed any of it as he stepped through the crowd in his tailored black suit, his expression unreadable while investors, reporters, and politicians turned their heads the second he entered the room. At 36, Daniel had built Blackstone Holdings into one of the most feared real estate empires in New York, and people reacted to him the same way they reacted to storms rolling across the ocean, beautiful from a distance, dangerous up close. His security team stayed 2 steps behind him while cameras flashed from every corner of the charity gala, capturing every cold glance and calculated movement. But near the back of the ballroom, sitting alone beside a towering indoor fountain, a little boy with messy dark hair and huge brown eyes stopped spinning the wheels of his tiny toy car the moment he saw Daniel walk in. The child froze completely. Then slowly, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing, he stood up from his chair. His small fingers tightened around the toy car before it slipped from his hand and rolled across the marble floor. The sound was tiny, almost invisible beneath the orchestra music, yet somehow Daniel heard it. He turned his head slightly, and then the little boy pointed directly at him. "Dad," the child whispered at first. Then louder this time, with innocent certainty that cut through the entire room. "Dad." Conversations stopped around them. A woman near the fountain inhaled sharply. A waiter nearly dropped a tray of champagne glasses. Daniel stopped walking entirely. For the first time in years, the color drained from his face. Because the boy wasn't just pointing at him randomly. The child was staring at him like he already knew him, like he had been waiting for him. Daniel's heartbeat slowed into something heavy and strange while every instinct in his body told him this made no sense. He had no children, no family, no room in his life for either. Yet the boy's eyes locked onto his with a familiarity that felt impossible to explain. Then Daniel noticed the woman standing beside the child. She looked terrified, not embarrassed, not confused, terrified. Her hand shot toward the little boy's shoulder so quickly it almost looked rehearsed. "Ethan," she whispered urgently, pulling him back toward her side. "Don't do that." But the child resisted just enough to keep staring at Daniel. "Mom," he said softly, confusion filling his tiny voice. "That's him." Daniel felt something cold move through his chest. The woman finally looked up at him fully, and the second their eyes met, time seemed to bend around them. Her face had changed since he'd last seen her. Softer now, paler, tired in ways expensive makeup couldn't hide. But he still recognized her immediately. Ava Monroe. 5 years ago, she had vanished from New York without warning after one disastrous night neither of them had ever spoken about again. No goodbye, no explanation, nothing. Daniel had spent months trying to find her before eventually convincing himself he didn't care anymore. Yet now she stood only 20 feet away from him, gripping the shoulder of a little boy who looked alarmingly familiar. Ava's lips parted slightly as if she wanted to say something, but no sound came out. Fear flickered across her face again. Real fear. Then she looked down at her son. "We're leaving," she whispered. She grabbed Ethan's hand and turned quickly toward the exit, but the little boy twisted around one last time, his wide eyes searching Daniel's face with heartbreaking certainty. "Bye, Dad," he called softly. Daniel didn't move. He couldn't. Around him, whispers spread through the ballroom like wildfire while reporters exchanged confused glances and guests stared openly now. But Daniel heard none of it, because all he could see was the little boy disappearing into the crowd beside Ava Monroe. And all he could think about was one terrifying question he never imagined asking himself. Why did that child have his eyes? Fear changes people faster than time ever could. Ava Monroe kept her head down as she hurried through the crowded hotel lobby, gripping Ethan's tiny hand so tightly that he finally looked up at her with confusion in his wide brown eyes. Outside, cold Manhattan rain streaked against the towering glass windows, while black luxury cars lined the curb beneath glowing city lights. Ethan struggled to keep up with her pace, his little sneakers squeaking across the polished marble floor. "Mom," he whispered softly, still looking back toward the ballroom entrance. "Why did you run?" Ava swallowed hard. Her pulse had not slowed since the moment Ethan pointed at Daniel Black. 5 years. 5 entire years of hiding, surviving, rebuilding her life from nothing. and somehow everything had collapsed in less than 10 seconds. She reached the revolving doors just as a valet opened one for her. The icy wind outside hit her face immediately, but she barely noticed it. Her thoughts were spiraling too fast. "Mom," Ethan asked again. "Was that really my dad?" Ava stopped walking so suddenly that people behind her nearly bumped into them. Her eyes closed for one painful second. She had spent years preparing herself for difficult questions, but not like this. Never like this. Especially not tonight. She knelt carefully in front of Ethan beneath the awning outside the hotel, while taxis splashed through rainwater along the street beside them. "You cannot call strangers that," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. Ethan frowned immediately. "But he is not a stranger." The words hit her harder than she expected. "What do you mean?" she asked softly. Ethan looked toward the hotel entrance again, like he expected Daniel to appear any second. "I saw his picture before." Ava's stomach tightened instantly. "What picture?" Ethan hesitated now, realizing he may have said something wrong. "The one in your drawer," he admitted carefully. "The one you look at when you think I am sleeping." Ava felt the air leave her lungs. Back in her tiny apartment in Queens, hidden beneath old documents and unpaid bills, she still kept one photograph she could never throw away. Daniel standing beside her on a rooftop in Brooklyn years ago, both of them smiling at something outside the camera frame, like life had once been simple. She had never shown it to Ethan, never explained who the man was. But children notice things adults believe they could hide forever. A horn blared somewhere nearby. Rain continued falling steadily around them, while Ethan stared at her with innocent confusion. "Did I do something bad?" he asked quietly. Ava forced herself to smile despite the pressure building in her chest. "No, sweetheart," she whispered. "You did not do anything wrong." But deep down, panic was beginning to consume her. Because Daniel Black was not the kind of man people accidentally crossed paths with twice. If he started asking questions, he would find answers. And Daniel had always been terrifyingly good at uncovering secrets. Across town, inside the back seat of a black Escalade moving silently through Manhattan traffic, Daniel sat completely motionless while city lights flashed across the tinted windows beside him. His assistant, Marcus Reed, glanced nervously from the front passenger seat. He had worked for Daniel nearly 8 years and had never seen him look shaken before tonight. "Should I cancel tomorrow's meetings?" Marcus finally asked carefully. Daniel did not answer immediately. His mind kept replaying the same moment over and over again. The little boy's voice. The way Ava looked terrified instead of surprised. And those eyes. God, those eyes looked exactly like his. Daniel loosened his tie slowly, staring out the window as rain blurred the city skyline into streaks of gold and gray. "Find her," he said quietly. Marcus blinked once. "Ava Monroe." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I want everything." His voice remained calm, but something underneath it had changed. "Where she lives, where she works, who the child is." Marcus hesitated carefully. "Daniel, if this becomes public, I do not care." The answer came too quickly, too sharply. Silence filled the vehicle after that. Then Daniel leaned back slowly, rubbing one hand across his face while a memory surfaced that he had buried years ago. Ava crying in the rain outside his penthouse. Ava trying to explain something while he walked away angry enough not to listen. Ava disappearing the next morning without a trace. And now suddenly there was a 5-year-old boy calling him dad in the middle of a ballroom full of witnesses. Daniel stared into the darkness outside the window while one impossible thought slowly took root in his mind. What if the child was telling the truth? Some questions follow you so quietly that you do not realize they have become part of your heartbeat. Daniel Black had not slept for more than 40 minutes all night. By 6:30 the next morning, the lights inside his penthouse office overlooking Central Park were already glowing against the gray Manhattan sky, while rain continued tapping softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows. His untouched coffee sat cooling beside stacks of financial reports he had not read. Normally, Daniel noticed everything. Numbers, patterns, weaknesses. But this morning, every thought kept circling back to one small voice inside a crowded ballroom. "Dad." He leaned back in his chair slowly, staring at the city below while memories he had spent years burying forced their way to the surface. Ava laughing beside him during late-night walks through Brooklyn. Ava sitting barefoot on his kitchen counter eating strawberries while reading business magazines she pretended to understand. Ava crying the night everything ended. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. 5 years ago, he had convinced himself she left because she wanted money or attention or revenge. It had been easier than admitting the truth. He had cared about her far more than he should have. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Marcus stepped into the office carrying a thin black folder. "I found her," he said carefully. Daniel opened his eyes immediately. Marcus placed the folder on the desk. Ava Monroe, 32 years old, lives in Queens, works part-time at a children's bookstore on Lexington Avenue. Daniel's expression remained unreadable. "And the boy?" Marcus hesitated slightly before answering. "Ethan Monroe, 5 years old." Daniel's fingers tightened subtly against the edge of his desk. 5 years old. The timing hit him instantly like a silent explosion. Marcus continued carefully. "There is no father listed on the birth certificate." Daniel looked up sharply. "No father." Marcus nodded. "It is blank." Silence filled the office again. Outside, distant traffic echoed through the rain while Daniel stared at the folder without opening it. Something about that detail unsettled him even more. Ava had erased someone completely. But why? Marcus shifted awkwardly before speaking again. "There is something else." Daniel finally looked at him. "The boy attends a private kindergarten in Manhattan." Marcus slid another paper across the desk. "Tuition is over $20,000 a year." Daniel frowned slightly. "A bookstore salary does not cover that." "No," Marcus agreed quietly. "It does not." Daniel finally opened the folder. Inside were photographs taken only hours earlier outside Ava's apartment building. Ava carrying grocery bags up cracked front steps. Ethan beside her wearing a yellow raincoat and holding the same toy car from the ballroom. Daniel stared at the image longer than he should have. The resemblance was becoming impossible to ignore now. The dark hair, the eyes, even the stubborn little expression Ethan wore looked painfully familiar. Daniel suddenly remembered something strange from the gala. Ethan had not looked afraid of him. Children usually were. Daniel had built an entire reputation on being intimidating. Yet Ethan had looked at him with warmth, trust, recognition, like finding someone he had missed for a very long time. "This cannot be a coincidence," Daniel muttered quietly. Marcus remained silent. Then Daniel noticed another photograph tucked into the back of the folder. Ava leaving a pharmacy 2 weeks earlier looking exhausted, while Ethan leaned sleepily against her shoulder. A prescription bag hung from her wrist. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "Is the boy sick?" Marcus nodded carefully. "Recurring asthma, according to medical records." Daniel looked back down at the photo. Ethan's tiny hand rested against Ava's neck while she carried him through cold February rain alone. Something unfamiliar twisted inside his chest. Guilt. He hated the feeling instantly. "She never contacted me," Daniel said quietly, almost to himself. Marcus chose his next words carefully. Maybe she thought she had a reason not to. Daniel's eyes darkened slightly. 5 years ago, the final conversation between him and Ava had ended badly enough that neither of them recovered from it. But now pieces were no longer fitting together the way he remembered. If Ethan truly was his son, then Ava had hidden an entire life from him. Yet the fear in her eyes last night did not look manipulative. It looked desperate. Daniel stood suddenly and walked toward the massive windows overlooking the city. Below him, New York moved endlessly through rain and noise and flashing headlights, completely unaware that his carefully controlled world was beginning to crack apart. Behind him, Marcus spoke quietly. "What do you want me to do now?" Daniel stared at his reflection in the glass for a long moment before answering. "Nothing." Marcus blinked in surprise. Daniel's voice lowered slightly. "I will handle this myself." Because deep down, a terrifying possibility had already begun taking root inside him. And for the first time in years, Daniel Black was afraid of discovering the truth. The past never disappears. It just waits for the right moment to return. Ava Monroe had spent 5 years building a life designed around one simple rule: stay invisible. Her apartment in Queens sat above an old laundromat with flickering hallway lights and radiators that clanged loudly every winter night. But it was safe, affordable, and far away from the world Daniel Black lived in. Most mornings began before sunrise. She would wake quietly, prepare Ethan's breakfast, answer overdue bill notices she pretended not to fear, then rush across the city to the children's bookstore where she worked 6 days a week. It was not glamorous, but it was stable, and stability mattered more than dreams now. That Thursday morning, Ava stood behind the bookstore counter, trying to focus on stacking new arrivals, while soft piano music drifted through the speakers overhead. Outside, Manhattan moved beneath cold spring rain and crowded sidewalks. But her hands would not stop trembling. Every time the front door opened, panic rose in her chest before she realized it was not him. Not Daniel. Her coworker Melanie noticed immediately. "You look exhausted," she said gently while organizing children's coloring. "Books nearby?" Ava forced a weak smile. "Just did not sleep much." Melanie frowned slightly. "Is Ethan okay?" Ava nodded too quickly. "He is fine." But the truth was Ethan had spent half the night coughing again. His asthma always worsened when weather shifted suddenly, and inhalers were becoming more expensive every month. Last week, she had skipped paying her own electric bill just to refill his prescription. She never complained about it. Ethan came first. Always. The tiny bell above the bookstore entrance suddenly rang. Ava looked up instinctively, and her entire body froze. Daniel Black stepped inside wearing a charcoal overcoat darkened slightly by rain. The bookstore instantly felt too small for someone like him. Several customers turned their heads without even realizing who he was yet, reacting purely to the quiet authority he carried into every room. Ava's heartbeat became painfully loud. Daniel's eyes found hers immediately. Neither of them moved for several seconds. Then little footsteps suddenly raced across the reading corner near the back of the store. "You came," Ethan shouted happily before Ava could stop him. Daniel looked down just as Ethan wrapped both small arms around his leg without hesitation. The entire world inside Ava seemed to stop breathing. Daniel stood completely still. He looked almost stunned by the simple contact. Ethan smiled up at him with complete trust while clutching his tiny toy car in one hand. "I told Mom you would come back," he said proudly. Ava rushed around the counter immediately. "Ethan," she whispered sharply. "Come here." But Ethan only frowned in confusion. "Why?" he asked. "He is nice." Daniel slowly looked up at Ava then, and something in his expression had changed since the gala. Less shock now. More focus. More certainty. Ava gently pulled Ethan back beside her while trying to ignore the way Daniel kept studying the child's face. "We need to talk," Daniel said quietly. Ava swallowed hard. "There is nothing to talk about." Daniel glanced toward Ethan carefully. "I think there is." Before Ava could answer, Ethan suddenly started coughing. A deep, painful cough that instantly drained the color from Ava's face. She knelt beside him immediately. "Sweetheart, breathe slowly," she whispered anxiously. Ethan tried to nod, but another coughing fit hit him harder this time. Ava reached into her purse quickly. Her expression changed instantly. Empty. Panic flashed across her face. She checked again desperately, even though she already knew the truth. The inhaler was gone. She had left it at home during the rush that morning. Daniel noticed everything immediately. "What does he need?" he asked sharply. "It is fine," Ava said too quickly while Ethan struggled to steady his breathing. "Ava." His voice carried calm authority now. "Tell me." Her eyes filled with humiliation. She hated this feeling. Hated looking helpless in front of him again after fighting so hard to survive without anyone's help. "His inhaler," she admitted quietly. Daniel did not hesitate. He removed his phone instantly and dialed someone. "I need a pediatric inhaler delivered to Lexington Books immediately," he said calmly. 5 minutes. Ava stared at him in disbelief. Ethan leaned weakly against her shoulder while Daniel crouched carefully in front of the little boy. "Hey," he said gently. "Can you take slow breaths for me?" Ethan nodded slightly while staring at him with those same familiar eyes. Daniel watched him closely for several quiet seconds before speaking again. "You are a strong little guy, huh?" Ethan managed a tiny smile. "Mom says I have to be." Something about that answer hit Daniel harder than he expected, because suddenly he could see it clearly now. 5 years without him. 5 years of Ava carrying everything alone. And for the first time since seeing Ethan, one terrifying possibility became impossible to ignore anymore. What if she never disappeared because she wanted to leave him? What if she disappeared because someone made her believe she had no other choice? The hardest secrets to hide are the ones children accidentally expose. The pediatric inhaler arrived in less than 4 minutes. Ava hated that she noticed the efficiency of it. One phone call from Daniel Black accomplished what ordinary people waited hours for. A courier rushed through the bookstore entrance carrying a small pharmacy bag while customers stepped aside instinctively. Daniel thanked the man quietly, then handed the inhaler directly to Ava without hesitation. Their fingers brushed for less than a second, but the contact still sent an uncomfortable wave of memories through her chest. Ava quickly helped Ethan use the inhaler while kneeling beside him near the reading corner. Slowly, his breathing steadied again. Relief softened her face immediately. Daniel watched everything silently. The way Ava stroked Ethan's hair while whispering calm reassurances. The way Ethan leaned into her instinctively, like she was the safest place in the world. Daniel had spent years around polished people with perfect manners and expensive smiles, but nothing about this felt artificial. It felt painfully real. Ethan looked up after a moment and smiled weakly. "I'm okay now." Ava kissed the top of his head gently. "I know, sweetheart." Then Ethan turned toward Daniel again with innocent curiosity. "Are you staying?" Ava's entire body stiffened. Daniel noticed immediately. He crouched slightly to meet Ethan at eye level. "Only if your mom says it is okay." Ethan considered that seriously before looking at Ava. "Can he?" Ava opened her mouth, but no answer came out. Because deep down, part of her knew this moment had been coming for years. The universe had finally stopped letting her run. Melanie suddenly approached carefully from the register area, clearly sensing tension. "Ava, your lunch delivery is here." Ava looked grateful for the interruption. "Thank you." She stood quickly, trying to regain control of the situation. "Ethan, go finish your dinosaur puzzle in the reading corner." Ethan hesitated. "Can he help me?" Daniel almost looked surprised by the question. Ava noticed it immediately. Powerful businessmen negotiated billion-dollar contracts every day, but nothing prepared them for 5-year-olds asking simple emotional questions. Ethan waited patiently. Daniel glanced at Ava once before answering softly. "Sure." Ethan smiled instantly and grabbed Daniel's hand without fear. Ava's breath caught quietly in her chest as she watched them walk together toward the children's play area near the back wall. It was not just resemblance anymore. It was instinct. Something invisible connected them in ways she could no longer pretend not to see. Daniel sat beside Ethan at the tiny activity table while the little boy pushed puzzle pieces around dramatically. "This one is hard," Ethan admitted seriously. Daniel picked up a green dinosaur piece and studied it carefully. "Maybe it goes here." Ethan's eyes widened. "That is exactly right." Daniel felt an unfamiliar warmth tug at something deep inside him. Strange how such a tiny victory suddenly mattered. Across the bookstore, Ava pretended to organize shelves while secretly watching them. Her chest ached with emotions she had buried for too long. Because this scene was something she once dreamed about during lonely nights when Ethan was a baby sleeping against her shoulder while unpaid bills covered the kitchen table. Back then, she used to wonder what kind of father Daniel might have been if everything had turned out differently. Then she forced herself to stop wondering. Hope had become too dangerous. Daniel looked up suddenly and caught her staring. Neither of them looked away this time. After a long silence, he stood and walked toward her slowly. "We need the truth," he said quietly. Ava lowered her eyes immediately. "You already have your life, Daniel." "That is not an answer." She swallowed hard. "Some things are better left alone." Daniel's expression tightened slightly. "Not this." Ava finally looked at him fully then. "You think this is simple?" she whispered. "You think you can walk into our lives after 5 years and ask questions like nothing happened?" Daniel lowered his voice carefully. "Then tell me what happened." Pain flickered across her face instantly. Real pain. The kind that came from carrying too much alone for too long. Before she could answer, Ethan suddenly ran toward them again, holding a crayon drawing proudly in both hands. "Look what I made." Daniel looked down. The drawing showed 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a huge blue sky. One tall man, one woman, one little boy. Above them, written in shaky kindergarten handwriting, were 3 simple words. "My family forever." Ava's eyes immediately filled with panic while Daniel stared at the picture in complete silence. Then Ethan smiled innocently and pointed at the tallest figure on the page. "That is you." Children say honest things adults spend years trying to hide. Silence settled heavily inside the bookstore after Ethan proudly held up the crayon drawing. Ava felt frozen in place, while Daniel stared at the paper in the little boy's hands like it carried answers he was almost afraid to touch. Ethan smiled innocently, completely unaware that one simple drawing had just shattered the fragile wall Ava spent years building around their lives. "I made the sky blue because Mom says blue means hope," Ethan explained happily. Daniel slowly took the paper from him with careful hands. His expression softened in a way Ava had never seen before. For years, Daniel Black had been described in magazines as ruthless, untouchable, impossible to read. But now he looked almost lost. His eyes moved across the childish drawing again, before finally landing on the tallest figure, holding Ethan's hand. "You drew me tall," Daniel said quietly. Ethan giggled. "Because you are." Ava looked away quickly, unable to breathe normally anymore. Everything about this moment felt dangerous. Because Daniel was no longer reacting like a curious stranger. He was reacting like someone emotionally connected already. Melanie suddenly appeared again near the register, lowering her voice carefully. "Ava, Mrs. Patterson is here asking for the special order books." Ava immediately grabbed the interruption. "I need to work." She gently touched Ethan's shoulder. "Sweetheart, go finish your snack in the back room." Ethan looked disappointed. "But, please." Something in Ava's voice made him obey this time. He nodded quietly before disappearing toward the employee break room, carrying his dinosaur puzzle and juice box. The second he was gone, Ava's composure cracked slightly. She crossed her arms tightly as if trying to physically hold herself together. "You should leave," she whispered. Daniel still held the drawing in his hand. "I cannot." Ava closed her eyes briefly. "Daniel, tell me the truth." His voice remained calm, but there was something relentless underneath it now. "Is Ethan my son?" The question finally existed out loud between them. Ava felt tears sting her eyes instantly. For years she imagined this moment happening 1,000 different ways, but nothing prepared her for how painful it actually felt. "You do not understand what happened," she whispered shakily. Daniel stepped closer carefully. "Then help me understand." Ava laughed softly then, but there was no happiness in it. Only exhaustion. 5 years ago you already made your choice." Daniel frowned immediately. "What does that mean?" Her eyes lifted toward him again, filled with hurt he had not seen before. "The night I told you I was pregnant, you never let me finish speaking." Daniel's entire expression changed. "What?" Ava swallowed hard. "You walked away." For a moment, Daniel genuinely looked stunned. "Ava, you never told me you were pregnant." "I tried." The words came out barely above a whisper now. Memories crashed through her mind all at once. 5 years earlier. Rain pouring outside Daniel's penthouse windows. Her hands shaking while holding the positive pregnancy test inside her purse. Headlines online showing photos of Daniel with another woman from a business event she misunderstood. The terrible fight that followed. Daniel accusing her of only wanting access to his world. Ava crying while trying to explain herself. Then Daniel answering a phone call halfway through the argument before walking away furious and emotionally closed off like he always did when hurt. By morning, everything had changed forever. Daniel stared at her now with growing disbelief. "You disappeared before I could find you." Ava shook her head slowly. "Because someone came to see me first." Daniel's jaw tightened immediately. "Who?" Ava hesitated. Fear flickered across her face again, the same fear he saw at the gala. "Your mother." The air between them seemed to stop moving. Daniel said nothing. Ava looked down at the floor while her voice trembled slightly. "She told me your future could not survive a scandal. She said a baby would destroy everything you worked for." Daniel's expression darkened immediately. "My mother said that to you?" Ava nodded slowly. "She offered me money to leave New York." Daniel looked horrified now. Truly horrified. "Did you take it?" Ava's eyes flashed with quiet pride despite everything. "No." Silence filled the bookstore again except for distant traffic outside and soft pages turning somewhere near the children's section. Daniel rubbed one hand slowly across his face like the room itself had become difficult to process. Then his eyes moved instinctively toward the back room, where Ethan sat unknowingly coloring dinosaurs alone. 5 years, Daniel whispered quietly. Ava's voice broke slightly. "I never wanted him to feel unwanted." Something shifted visibly inside Daniel then. Not anger, not shock, something deeper. Regret, crushing and irreversible. Then before either of them could speak again, Ethan suddenly ran back into the room, holding his chest slightly. His breathing sounded wrong immediately. Ava turned instantly. "Ethan." The little boy looked frightened now. "Mom, it hurts." Some moments divide your life into before and after without warning. Ava dropped to her knees beside Ethan instantly, her heart slamming painfully against her ribs while the little boy struggled to breathe normally. His tiny fingers clutched the front of his sweater as panic filled his wide brown eyes. "Mom," he whispered weakly. "I cannot." "Slow breaths," Ava said quickly, trying to steady her own fear. "Look at me, sweetheart. Just look at me." But this time the inhaler was not helping fast enough. Daniel moved immediately. Every instinct inside him sharpened at once as he watched Ava's hands tremble while trying to calm Ethan. "Call an ambulance," Melanie whispered urgently from behind the counter. Ava shook her head instantly. "No." Daniel looked at her sharply. "What?" Her face flushed with humiliation even in the middle of panic. "The insurance company still has not approved the last hospital bill." Daniel stared at her in disbelief. Ethan coughed again, harder this time, and Ava closed her eyes briefly like the sound physically hurt her. "I can drive him," she whispered quickly. "The urgent care center is only 12 minutes away." Daniel's expression darkened immediately. 12 minutes is too long. Without waiting for permission, he carefully lifted Ethan into his arms. The little boy instinctively wrapped weak arms around Daniel's neck without hesitation. Something about that simple trust hit Daniel hard enough to steal his breath for a second. "Daniel," Ava started. "Come with me." His voice left no room for argument now. Outside, rain still covered Manhattan in silver reflections while Daniel's black SUV pulled to the curb almost immediately after one text message from Marcus. The driver jumped out quickly and opened the back door. Ava climbed inside beside Ethan while Daniel remained close enough to keep one steady hand against the little boy's shoulder. Ethan leaned toward him unconsciously during another coughing fit. Ava noticed it. Daniel noticed it too. Neither of them spoke about it. Traffic lights blurred outside the windows while the city rushed past in streaks of red and white. Inside the SUV, fear filled every inch of silence. Ava stroked Ethan's damp hair gently while trying not to cry in front of him. "You are okay?" she whispered repeatedly. "Mom is here." Daniel watched her quietly. 5 years ago, Ava had dreamed about becoming an architect. She used to carry sketchbooks everywhere and stop randomly on sidewalks just to admire buildings most people ignored. Now dark circles rested beneath her eyes. Exhaustion lived inside her voice, and every decision she made revolved around survival. Daniel hated realizing he knew nothing about the life she had been forced to live without him. The SUV finally pulled beneath the emergency entrance of St. Vincent Medical Center. Nurses rushed forward immediately after recognizing Daniel Black stepping out of the vehicle carrying a frightened child. Everything moved fast after that. Sliding hospital doors, bright white lights, medical forms, questions, oxygen masks. Ava stayed beside Ethan the entire time, holding his hand while doctors examined him carefully. Daniel stood nearby, feeling strangely useless despite controlling billion-dollar companies with a single phone call every day. Because none of that power mattered here. One pediatric doctor finally approached after nearly 20 minutes. "His breathing is stabilizing," she said gently. Ava visibly sagged with relief. "Thank God." The doctor glanced down at Ethan's chart. "Has anyone discussed additional testing for him before?" Ava looked confused. "What kind of testing?" The doctor hesitated carefully. "His asthma symptoms are worsening faster than expected. Sometimes that can point to underlying respiratory complications." Fear instantly returned to Ava's face. "What complications?" "We cannot know yet without scans and blood work." Ava lowered her eyes immediately. Daniel noticed the reaction instantly. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Ava looked embarrassed now. "The insurance deductible reset in January." Daniel understood immediately. Money. Again. Every dangerous moment in their lives somehow circled back to money. The doctor spoke gently. "We can begin with basic testing tonight if you want." Ava hesitated too long. Daniel stepped forward without thinking. "Do whatever he needs." Ava turned sharply toward him. "Daniel, this is not a discussion." His voice stayed calm, but firm enough to stop her. "He gets every test." Ava stared at him silently while emotions she could not control moved across her face. Gratitude, fear, pride, exhaustion. Daniel looked back toward Ethan lying quietly in the hospital bed with tiny monitors attached beside him. The little boy looked so small against white blankets and oversized pillows. Then Ethan opened his eyes slightly and searched the room until he found Daniel standing nearby. A weak smile appeared instantly. "You stayed," he whispered sleepily. Daniel felt something crack deep inside his chest. Slowly, He walked closer to the bed. Yeah, he answered softly. I stayed. Then Ethan reached out one small hand toward him without even thinking about it. And this time, Daniel took it immediately. Sometimes the people who stay beside you during fear become impossible to forget. Midnight settled quietly over St. Vincent Medical Center while soft monitor sounds echoed through the pediatric wing. Ethan finally slept peacefully beneath warm hospital blankets, one tiny hand still loosely wrapped around Daniel's fingers as if afraid he might disappear the second he let go. Daniel sat beside the hospital bed without moving, his dark suit jacket folded across the chair nearby, while exhaustion shadowed his face for the first time in years. Across the room, Ava stood near the window staring down at rain-covered Manhattan streets glowing beneath city lights. Neither of them had spoken much during the last hour. Too many truths were hanging silently between them now. The doctor's words still echoed inside Ava's mind. Additional testing. Respiratory complications. More appointments. More bills. More fear. She closed her eyes briefly. She was so tired of being afraid all the time. You should sit down, Daniel said quietly behind her. Ava shook her head slightly. If I sit down right now, I think I might fall apart. Daniel watched her carefully. 5 years ago, Ava used to challenge him constantly. She argued with him over meaningless things just to make him laugh. She hated expensive restaurants and once made him eat hot dogs from a street cart at 2 in the morning because she claimed rich people forgot what normal life tasted like. But the woman standing by the hospital window now looked like someone who had carried too much alone for far too long. You should have told me, Daniel said softly. Ava gave a faint, tired laugh without humor. And what would have happened? Daniel frowned slightly. I would have been there. Ava finally turned toward him then, pain flickering visibly across her face. Would you? The question hit harder than he expected. Back then you barely trusted anyone, Daniel. Your entire world revolved around control. She looked toward Ethan sleeping quietly. I was scared you would look at him like a complication instead of a child. Daniel lowered his eyes briefly, because part of him hated admitting she might not have been entirely wrong. 5 years ago, ambition controlled everything in his life. His company was expanding rapidly. Investors watched his every move. His mother constantly reminded him that emotions were weaknesses powerful men could not afford. Ava walked slowly toward Ethan's bed now, gently brushing soft hair away from her son's forehead. After I left New York, I found out I was having a boy. Her voice softened slightly, and suddenly none of the other things mattered anymore. Daniel listened silently. I worked 3 jobs while I was pregnant. Ava continued quietly. Coffee shops, freelance design work, babysitting. She smiled faintly through exhaustion. I used to sketch building ideas during Ethan's naps because part of me still believed I might become an architect someday. Daniel felt guilt tighten painfully inside his chest. He had spent those same years flying between penthouses, business conferences, and luxury hotels while Ava struggled to survive alone carrying his child. Their child. The thought no longer felt impossible now. It felt terrifyingly real. Ethan suddenly shifted slightly in his sleep. Mom, he murmured weakly. Ava immediately leaned closer. I am here, sweetheart. Ethan's sleepy eyes opened halfway before finding Daniel still sitting beside him. A tiny smile appeared instantly. You are still here too. Daniel nodded softly. Yeah. Ethan looked genuinely relieved by that answer. Good. Then his small fingers tightened around Daniel's hand again before he drifted back asleep almost immediately. Ava stared at the scene quietly while emotion filled her eyes again. Because Ethan had never attached himself to anyone this quickly before. Daniel slowly looked down at the little boy sleeping beside him. He trusts me, he said quietly, almost confused by it. Ava swallowed hard. Children know when someone wants to stay. Silence settled between them once more until a soft knock interrupted the room. Marcus stepped carefully inside, holding a sealed medical envelope. His expression looked tense. The preliminary blood work results came back faster than expected, he said quietly. Ava's face immediately paled. Daniel stood slowly. What is it? Marcus hesitated before handing the envelope directly to Daniel. There is something else attached to the report. Daniel frowned slightly while opening it. Inside sat Ethan's lab paperwork clipped together with another document from hospital administration. Daniel's eyes moved across the page once. Then everything in. His expression changed instantly. Ava noticed immediately. What? she whispered nervously. Daniel looked up slowly, shock visible across his face for the first time all night. Attached to Ethan's hospital file was an old insurance authorization form from years earlier. And listed beneath emergency contact history was a name neither of them expected to see. Eleanor Black, Daniel's mother. The truth becomes dangerous when too many people already know it. Ava stared at the insurance form in Daniel's hand while her heartbeat turned painfully uneven. Eleanor Black. The name alone was enough to bring back years of fear she thought she had buried forever. Daniel looked from the document to Ava slowly, disbelief hardening across his face. My mother knew about Ethan? Ava lowered her eyes immediately. Silence answered him before her voice finally did. She found me 3 months after I left New York. Daniel's grip tightened around the paperwork. You told me she offered you money to disappear. Ava nodded faintly. I refused. Daniel frowned sharply. Then why is her name connected to Ethan's medical records? Ava hesitated too long. That was all the confirmation Daniel needed to understand something much bigger had been happening behind his back for years. Rain tapped softly against the hospital windows while Ethan continued sleeping peacefully between them, unaware that the foundation of his entire life was slowly unraveling. Ava, Daniel said quietly now. Tell me everything. She looked exhausted. Not just physically exhausted, but emotionally worn down in the way people become after carrying impossible secrets alone for too long. Finally, she sat slowly beside Ethan's bed and folded trembling hands together. When I left New York, I moved to Philadelphia first, she whispered. I thought if I stayed far enough away, everything would calm down. Daniel listened without interrupting. But after Ethan was born, your mother found me somehow. Ava swallowed hard before continuing. She came to my apartment alone. Memories flooded back instantly. Eleanor Black standing inside a tiny apartment wearing an elegant cream coat that probably cost more than Ava's monthly rent. The cold disapproval in her eyes when she looked around the cramped room. The silence after seeing baby Ethan sleeping in a second-hand crib beside the kitchen table. She asked to see him. Ava whispered quietly. Daniel's jaw tightened visibly. And you let her? Ava looked up with tears filling her eyes. He was your son. The words landed heavily between them. Daniel felt his chest tighten painfully, hearing her finally say it out loud. Not possibility anymore. Not suspicion. Truth. Ava looked toward Ethan sleeping quietly beneath soft hospital lights. Your mother held him for almost an hour, she continued softly. She cried while she rocked him. Daniel blinked once, genuinely shocked. Crying was not something Eleanor Black did publicly. Ever. Then she told me something I never forgot, Ava whispered. She said powerful families survive by protecting their name first and their hearts second. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. That sounded exactly like his mother. Ava's voice grew quieter. She said if the media discovered your child before your company stabilized, investors would panic. Headlines would destroy your reputation. Daniel looked furious now. So she convinced you to stay hidden. Ava shook her head slowly. No, Daniel frowned. Then what? Pain crossed her face again. Ethan got sick when he was 6 months old. Daniel felt cold immediately. What happened? His lungs were underdeveloped after birth. He spent almost 2 weeks in the hospital. Ava's voice trembled slightly now. I could not afford the treatments. Daniel looked down at Ethan instantly. Ava continued softly. Your mother paid every medical bill anonymously. Silence filled the room completely. Daniel struggled to process the contradiction. Eleanor Black had pressured Ava to disappear, yet secretly protected Ethan at the same time. Why would she do that? He asked quietly. Ava gave a sad smile. Because she loved him. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. But she never told me. Ava looked away. She made me promise. Daniel stood suddenly and walked toward the hospital window, anger and confusion colliding violently inside him. For years he believed Ava abandoned him. Without explanation. Meanwhile his mother had apparently known everything. His son. The hospital visits. The financial struggles. All of it. Behind him, Ava spoke softly. I think part of her wanted to protect you. And part of her was afraid of what losing Ethan would do to her conscience. Daniel ran one hand through his hair, slowly, while trying to steady his thoughts. Nothing about his life made sense anymore. Then the hospital room door opened quietly again. This time, an older nurse stepped carefully inside holding another chart folder. Mr. Black. Daniel turned immediately. Yes. The nurse glanced at Ethan kindly before speaking. We found an older emergency contact authorization connected to the child's file. Daniel frowned slightly. Another one? The nurse nodded. It was signed years ago. She handed him the form carefully. Daniel opened it slowly. Then his entire expression changed again. Because beneath Eleanor Black's signature sat another name written clearly in dark ink. Daniel Black.